Great, thanks Sarah, and look, thanks to Mosh. These webinars are great. So the feedback we've had so far has been tremendous. So I really appreciate the ongoing support, Sarah, for us in the entire industry who are part of these webinars. So in terms of getting started, look, I won't go into a lot of detail about us, but Alex, perhaps did you want to just provide a quick overview of, I guess, our working relationship and how we know each other for the people on the call today?
Yeah, sure. Look, first and foremost, I want to thank you for having me on as a panelist. It's definitely a privilege to be able to share my views on managing contractors amongst other HSC peers. I have no doubt that today's conversation will generate plenty of discussion. Just a little bit about myself. I've spent 7 of the last 8 years at Ventia with a 1-year gap in between. And during my first stint at Ventia, which is formerly Broad Spectrum, I spent my tenure reporting to Mark, who provided me with some great mentorship, and with that support, it's led to the opportunity to move into the GM role. So really appreciative of that. The telco business that I support within Ventia is approximately a $1.2 billion business across Australia and New Zealand. And who is Ventia, you may ask? Ventia is an employer of over 15,000 employees and about 3 to 4 times that amount in contractors. So we are a provider of services to businesses who want to outsource the management of their infrastructure. And Ventia employ close to 200 HSC professionals, and 50 of those sit within the telco sector. So this topic is pretty close to my heart, because our model at Ventia, especially in telcos, to predominantly outsource our workforce, whilst that workforce is still utilising our safe systems of work and things like our SWIMs, etc. And we also have an added complexity of being a self-insured under the Comcare scheme as well, which adds a compliance burden there. So therefore, hoping my experience can add or stimulate some conversation today and add some value. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Alex. I've no doubt your stories will. And look, we've got plenty of war stories having worked together, and certainly around managing contractors. So for those that missed the previous webinars, just to let everyone know on the call that look, we do have a self-assessment assurance tool that organisations can use if they wish, just to better understand their current versus the desired state, which broadly tracks, I guess, the series of webinars we're going through today. In terms of the recent webinar, just to recap, we spent a little bit of time walking with Laura from Scout. We spoke a bit about compliance versus culture, some of the challenges around setting expectations, in particular with labour hire, and how to organise contractors ready for work. So mobilisation based on the different risk profiles and contractor type, which can be varied and many. So lots of learning there. So feel free to go and have a look at the previous webinars if you've missed those ones, both number 1 and 2. But look, today, managing contractors, there's so many different things we can talk about today, and we're really keen to get everyone's feedback on the call. There are a couple of polls coming up. Really encourage your participation. What we will talk about in terms of managing contractors today is this concept of outsourcing versus insourcing. Now, often that's a decision that's made at the very start when you're sourcing to decide whether you're going to contract at all. But it's also a question that can be asked through the whole life cycle of contractor management. And I know as a business owner myself, I continually challenge myself around whether we insource or outsource work. It's not all about insourcing and outsourcing just health and safety and contractor management. It's about insourcing or outsourcing any type of work. We'll also talk about the communication of hazards, some of the challenges around authorising work to occur when you're engaging contractors, when you're not physically there in particular, and just some concepts around software deployment as how that relates to contractor management too. So I can see some chats coming through. We'll have a look at those in a second. But before we do that, just a quick poll, Sarah. Bit of a question just to get a bit of feedback from the audience there today. What is your highest priority when outsourcing? Now that could be, for those might ask, outsourcing, what does that mean? It's usually when you're engaging an external third party to perform some sort of work. That could be outsourcing operations. It could be outsourcing health and safety work. Any sort of outsourcing. Keen to get people's views on what are their biggest considerations when they're making the decision around outsourcing work.
Okay, just about there. Almost everyone has voted. Still going. All right, well, there's a good winner.
Expertise. Okay, 67%, which is great. Unions have got 0%. I know for some organisation that can be a bit of a challenge in terms of the industrial issues around outsourcing work, but the other close winner is outcomes. So expertise and outcomes, clearly, you know, a big factor there in terms of deciding when to outsource work. Given that a lot of people are on the call today as well, it also might be worth calling out the obvious around health and safety considerations. And we do challenge everyone on the call to get involved in some of those commercial decisions around whether to insource and outsource, and what are the health and safety implications and outcomes in making those sorts of decisions. So Alex, from your point of view, I know you've had a huge amount of experience around workforce management in terms of, you know, those decisions around insourcing and outsourcing work. Now, from your experience, you know, what do you see some of the challenges and considerations when you're making that decision around using third parties?
Mark, it's an interesting question. I actually found that the top four hard to split myself. If I was to focus on the top two, I often see at differing times these two come into conflict with each other. You know, I spoke up front about the amount of resource that Ventia, or health and safety resource that Ventia has internally. And within the telco business, we have 50 resources. About a third of these resources effectively are utilised to onboard and manage contractor compliance. As you can imagine, that's a significant cost. And when at differing times within the business environment, you do get challenged on that amount of resource that's sitting within your organisation. If I shift to a time perspective, we often have programs of work where we have last minute changes to program, which may require you know, a contractor to be onboarded very last minute to help or partner with operations to help deliver to a particular program. And with an internal workforce, you've obviously got the ability to flex and focus your attention elsewhere and shift very, very quickly. And there have been times where we have a contractor working within our organisation that haven't been fully onboarded, but with other provisions in place, such as, you know, having a fully supervised, having that contractor fully supervised 100% of the time until we can get them onboarded to the level that we're comfortable with. So I see, you know, from a cost and time perspective, I can see that they can be conflicting depending on where the organisation is from a program perspective.
Yeah, great. And look, you know, the decision around to insource or outsource, as I sort of mentioned, I mean, that doesn't have to be just around health and safety activity as it relates to contractors. It could be related to any sort of work. And for health and safety professionals to be, you know, collaborating with senior leaders around these decisions often is really important. I was talking to someone recently around a decision to use Uber as part of their logistics supply chain. And the health and safety considerations around making that decision are huge. And the potential reputational damage and or potential reputational opportunities to really go faster and outsource things that may not be core business. So certainly there's not a one size fits all, but do encourage organisations and health and safety professionals to continue to challenge yourselves around whether to insource or outsource the type of operations that you're involved in. And in terms of communicating with contractors as they're mobilised and you're managing the contractors. You know, we spoke a fair bit already around the pre-qualification, around you know, not going too far, not sticking your nose in too far, and just trying to find what the line in the sand is. And you know, if you're looking at purely from a legal point of view, you know, this concept around doing what's reasonably practicable is a great starting point. There's also lots of case law around being reasonably reliant on contractors, third parties. So, you know, as the head contractor or the principal contractor engaging contractors or third parties to do that when a decision is made to outsource, often organisations are challenged a bit on how far to go and are continually looking at what the contractor's doing as opposed to what they need to do. So, you know, don't forget that you don't necessarily need to do everything. And more importantly, it's important that you learn to communicate what your hazards are to the contractors so the contractors can manage that themselves as opposed to you doing it for them. I think that's fair to say, Alex, from your point of view. You know, do you have any stories around, you know, the challenges around trying to communicate on-site risks as the asset owner or even as the contractor to your subcontractors?
Yeah, look, it's a big challenge where, you know, part of the Federal Safety Commission's accreditation requires us as a principal contractor to communicate the project risk register to our subcontractors prior to that commercial engagement. Look, we do tick off this criteria and demonstrate doing it, but can I put hand on heart and say it's effective as what I'd like it to be? Hell no. Essentially that, you know, in my mind, that the best way to communicate those outcomes is really done in a face-to-face environment. You know, utilising a project induction or similar. Recent times, we've you know, the online induction during the COVID period. For me, it's seemed to started to lose effectiveness with people becoming distracted and not paying attention. So we are seeing, you know, some of these kinds of issues within our business. But this is also where our assurance program can be prevalent in terms of monitoring the effectiveness of critical controls. And while this has a heavy compliance focus, I think it can easily be shifted to more of a coaching methodology rather than you know, that compliance focus, and really working with a contractor to get to the standard, you know, that's required or expected of them. Because often when we do onboard a contractor, they're not necessarily going to be to the required standard from health and safety standard that we would expect. So we often partner with contractors in that field assurance piece to you know, work with them to get them to a level that we need them to be to over a period of time.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex. In terms of permits, this is often a really big topic around managing contractors. You know, we spoke a lot about up front around what's the role of different parties and trying to be really clear up front in agreement and even at mobilisation stage. From your perspective, Alex, you know, what is reasonable in terms of signing off permits? Do you find that the head contractor always has to be the approver?
No, look, it's been a huge topic for our organisation, and we undertake a lot of civil work and a significant amount of excavation type activities. In the past, what we have done is had a delegation of authority process where effectively we take contractors through a regime where they get to a point where they're signing and approving their own permits, which is reviewed periodically. And that has worked well in the past, but we've also had situations where, you know, when you've got a commercial arrangement in place with a client where a contractor is, you know, they're rewarded for effectively volume of work. Sometimes that can, you know, have its risks. And given the digital environment that we're in nowadays, we've been recently able to move to an environment where contractors are able to complete permit approvals online, attach you know, relevant artifacts, and those permits and artifacts can be reviewed offline, off-site, and approved utilising electronic means. So I think there's a significant opportunity here. And to be fair, since we've gone to that system, I feel like things have really improved from a permitting perspective. And if you're asking a contractor to attach an artifact, which is auditable effectively, we've seen a huge improvement in that risk profile of ours, and we're definitely hitting a lot less assets.
So Alex, as you talk around some of those challenges and the shift there around authorising permits, there's just a couple little chats here. Kathy is saying that the permit should be the control of the subcontractor, that they should be the approver, which could be true in some circumstances. Then we've got another comment here from Mark who talks around permits are really important as a way of managing and preventing conflicts between works, between multiple parties and stakeholders. So, and that's a risk. Sometimes having someone a higher level up the chain overseeing the interface between works, authorising permits can be important as well. So clearly it's not a one size fits all. Greg also talks around some of the challenges of a contractor and their subcontractors and trying to understand how to manage permits when you've got multiple layers of third-party workforce working together. So, clearly it's a bit of a challenge, and today's not about giving everyone the answers, more around sharing some of our learning around what works, what doesn't, and a few considerations around some of these subject areas. It can be a bit of a challenge.
Look, they're all very, very valid points, Mark. And I think the comment you made around it's not one size fits all is pertinent. It's definitely spot on. And I think, processes within organisations need to be tailored for that business. So in an environment like the environment that I work in, where we're not working within a gated construction site, and we have a workforce which is spread all over the country working on suburban streets or remote areas, we don't have that ability to be on site 100% of the time. So effectively, we've had to think a little bit differently in the way that we operate. And we've had good outcomes. If I put hand on heart, I'm actually genuinely surprised with the outcomes that we've had, and that is not taking for granted the comments that have been made, because I actually agree with what's been put forward. But we did work closely with operations to determine those parameters, and also with the client as well, because our client is quite prescriptive on the way they manage critical risk as well.
Yeah, great. And look, if you use this concept of trying to empower the workforce to make as many decisions as they can within a framework that's reasonable, the more freedom you can give people within a framework that allows them to make their own decisions safely. There's lots and lots of opportunities to allow that to occur, so everyone can work faster and potentially even safer. But again, that's not always the case depending on the situation. So in terms of managing contractors, there's lots of opportunities around using software. Alex, you've made reference to using software already and how that's benefited your organisation. What I will say, as organisations start to consider the use of software, is to be really clear in your requirements up front. A lot of these things that we spoke around insourcing or outsourcing, whether you use permits or you don't use permits, and whether you use software to do the work or some sort of manual process, it comes back to really understanding your own risk profile and requirements. We've probably got a few more minutes left before we sort of hand things over to a bit more of a Q&A. But Alex, from your perspective, have you had much experience in project managing or overseeing software requirements as it relates to contractor management?
Most definitely. I've definitely spent a lot of time on a program of work focused on outsourcing that contractor onboarding piece. I think that the great thing about software is, and a lot of us in health and safety love our data, but it gives us an ability to make data-driven decisions on improvements. So, you know, whether that's in relation to critical risk or hold points, or in an onboarding process, the benefits of using software are, you know, that ability to pull the data and apply it to your business framework and make decisions based on that data. So, yeah, I think it's definitely the way of the future. I don't think I'm saying anything that isn't already well known. And, you know, the ability to, and things that we're currently investigating at the moment as well, is the ability to manage work sites remotely. And I think that's something that arose during the whole COVID lockdown period. And again, I think that's something that can be investigated further in terms of, you know, remote site locations. And again, our experience has suggested that we can still undertake a very compliance-focused assurance activity remotely successfully with good outcomes.
It's interesting you use the word compliance-focused, and you know, and you've also mentioned various accreditation requirements on the call today as well. Often they do get in the way in terms of trying to do things really effectively and building a really high performance culture if you're resorting back to just doing it because of compliance sake. But you know, having a foundation of compliance is always important, but it's just about getting the balance, I guess.
It is a mix. It is a mix, Mark, and I think look, if it's blending the two and to be able to get, you know, the outcome that you need. I'm a big supporter of face-to-face being, you know, the more effective from a culture perspective, undoubtedly. But when you don't have that ability, there are still ways that we can be effective if we do think a little bit differently.
So we're approaching a bit of a Q&A now, Sarah, and I've just got one on the line here now from Lawrence, asking around how we manage communication effectively, particularly with the front line when your contractors are subcontracting out work. And there's lots of potential options here, but certainly we've spoken about this a little bit in the previous calls, particularly around setting expectations in agreements during the mobilisation stage, around having some sort of expectation of your contractors when they do subcontract out the work, that they communicate that with you, and some sort of parameters around that. How that then feeds down to your front line, I think it really depends on your organisation and how you manage the communication, and how you can sort of use existing communication channels to make sure information is feeding up and down the organisation relatively quickly. Alex, have you got any views on or experiences on how you manage communication and visibility of subcontractors?
Yeah, look, this is a big challenge for our organisation, and we effectively call that secondary subcontractors. It is a challenge. We still treat those secondaries like our primaries in terms of the onboarding process, but there is a challenge. There is definitely a challenge within the industry. I think, again, if we harp back on the previous slide around technology, you know, we utilise work allocation, our work allocation system, to push out messages electronically to the workforce. But that's something that we invested a significant amount of time into to be able to, you know, have a software that enables us to do that. But I believe that that's where the future lies, if I'm honest. But very, very challenging. I don't think that our business has nailed it, if I'm perfectly honest. And I'd love to connect with people outside of this forum to continue that discussion. Yeah,
look, I mean, Alex, you mentioned Ventia's got 15,000 odd employees. I'd hate to think how many contractors they've got, contracting companies, let alone actual contractor workers. To have perfect communication with your subcontractors is, you know, near impossible, I think, with a workforce that size. And leveraging, I guess, your existing operational processes sounds really important, rather than trying to overlay that with another form of communication. Open to any other Q&A or chats too from people as we start to round out the discussion today around managing contractors. Any questions or comments people might wish to have. As we wait for those to come through, I mean, if you are after additional information, we do have a stack of information on our website. Monash also has some great material on their website on previous webinars around contractor management. We've got a few blogs there on managing contractor requirements as it relates to software, and also this concept of outsourcing, commonly known as business process outsourcing or BPO, and how organisations may wish to use that. We've got any more chats there, Sarah, that you can see?
Well, there's a question from Ashley. I think you just read my mind, that she's talking to you. We embrace software for onboarding, permits, training, inductions, but culture is something we still see on the ground only. I'm thinking things like assurance activity on the job could feed back into software. Anything else?
Oh, that's an interesting. It's an interesting point. I think it does feed, which should feed back in. I mean, that assurance activity will provide you with a particular data set on a particular risk profile, which should be utilised to target initiatives or strategic decisions that are made in the future. And can definitely be linked back into the cultural piece and that face-to-face interaction. We do that quite frequently within our organisation. When periodically, I'd say 3 monthly, we review that data and target initiatives based on that data. And those initiatives are generally a face-to-face interaction with our front line. To walk them through. The initiative or the improvement or the concern, essentially.
Can I just jump in quickly? I don't normally say anything. I have shared a couple of the past webinars at the top of the chat, so if you scroll right back, and just on Ashley's comment, I think whatever software you use, you need to make sure that it's totally configurable so that what you require, you can do in the software. So if you want to ask a contractor extra questions, you should be able to make sure that's easily done for your requirements. So we've got a webinar in a couple of weeks, I think, on that with our particular software. And also I'm going to share a quick survey in the chat, and it is quick, and it just helps us improve all the webinars. So if you can open that link and quickly complete it, that would be great. Any other questions? No. Well, we're exactly on time, Mark, for once.
Thanks, Sarah. We try and get it right from time to time. So thanks again for your support, and thanks, Alex, for jumping in. Great to hear from you again, and yeah, all the best with your contractors.
Thanks for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
All right, I'll share the survey on the email later today, and keep track of your spam box because sometimes the emails travel in there. And thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week, next Wednesday, hopefully.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.